Trespass to land protects possession of the land, not ownership of the land. The person in possession of the land has the right of ejectment, the right to use minimal physical force to expel a trespasser. Often the owner of the land will be in possession of the land. However, if ownership and possession are separated, for instance if the land is rented out, then an allegation of trespass requires careful consideration of who was in possession of the land. This case is a great example of how it can all go wrong. Lockett owned the premises in question, and they had been rented from him for some years by a man named Francis. Francis's lease was expiring on the 8th of May. Lockett initially made an agreement with Mrs. Haddrick that she could rent the premises from the 8th of May. However, before the tenancy was due to commence, he changed his mind, returned her deposit, and told her the deal was off. She was, it seems, pretty determined to move in. On May the 6th, Francis had basically moved out. He had only a few possessions left on the premises. At the premises, he was met by Lockett, the owner, and Lloyd, who seems to have worked for Lockett. He handed the key to the estate agent, Brown, and really just wanted to get out of there. Mrs. Haddrick then came over the fence and into the premises. Francis, the departing tenant, doesn't seem to have cared one way or another. Lockett, the owner, definitely cared, and he had Lloyd physically eject her. The question is whether this was lawful. Who was in possession? Lockett was entitled to remove Mrs. Haddrick from the premises or to authorise someone else to do so, unless there was some ground on which Mrs. Haddrick could, as it were, justify her entry as against Lockett. In my opinion, that ground existed because the evidence establishes that Francis, who was entitled to possession at the time, authorised or consented to the entry by Mrs. Haddrick, and so she was not a trespasser at all. Even though the house was empty, Francis remained in possession until the end of the lease on the 8th of May. He didn't object to Mrs. Haddrick being on the premises, even if she did come over the fence, so there was no trespass, and the assault upon her was not justified.